We help students and teachers talk about controversial issues, such as some of the issues pertaining to the election, but also we've been doing this for 6 or 7 years at least. So not just during the elections. There's a lot more, as you guys know, interesting work to be done on critical thinking and improving the level of discussion, even when we're not bombarded with negative object lessons of how not to practice civics. I have my colleagues here, Ann Sanderson and Aiden Castigian. I'll let them just briefly introduce themselves as well.
Hi, I'm Ann, and I'm the CEO of Thinker Analytics and a veteran teacher, about 20 years. Yep, happy to join you all today. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, and my name is Aiden Castigian. I'm a program director at Thinker Analytics. I also teach logic and critical thinking at Wheaton College in Massachusetts. And my background's in sort of political philosophy and ethics, so always happy to work with teachers who are teaching civics in particular. So really happy to be here.
Awesome, thank you guys. And yeah, why don't we do just quick introductions from everybody else as well. And if you could also just say a sentence or two about like why you're here, like on your lovely Thursday afternoon. What are you hoping to get out of the session, just so that we can make sure to address it? That'd be helpful.
Guess I'll
Corbin,
start.
do you want to kick us off?
I'm Sean Labrecht. I'm a teacher at Waltham Public Schools. I'm a new teacher, and my student goal this year is to basically have students be able to do a better job arguing and using evidence to enforce their arguments, and then also explain that evidence and how it supports their argument. So when I was looking through these webinars, like this is also part of my professional practice goal, is coming to these webinars, because I thought this would be a good step in getting them to that, helping them move along.
Everything you just said is what I love working on too. So that's great. What do you teach, Sean?
I teach 7th grade social studies.
Oh, great. So is that mostly U.S. history, or is it kind of a little bit of everything?
I wish it was U.S. history, but it is basically like ancient civilizations mixed with geography. They just released new standards, which you may be aware of, but we're kind of because of Corona, it's kind of focusing a little more on geography than I wanted to, but gotta do what you gotta do.
And are you teaching entirely on Zoom, or are you kids in person? Or?
It's right now I'm entirely remote. There's a plan for students to come back, which is a phased plan, which I personally don't think is going to happen. But so yeah, it's all virtual right now.
Wow. 7th graders on virtual has got to be tough. Amazing. Well, really glad you're here, and sounds like you're in the right spot. Let's see, Allison, did you want to hop in?
Sure. My name is Allison Noyes. I work with Emerging America, which is a project at the Collaborative for Educational Services. Collaboratives in the state of Massachusetts and around the country support school districts, particularly with special education needs. And our niche for a long time has been looking at history and social studies and access and accessibility. And we have a grant from the Library of Congress to help teachers use primary sources, particularly with an angle of how that increases accessibility, sort of using universal design principles to build from the ground up to make lessons planned in a way that gets people's juices going on a lot of levels, using a lot of methods and a lot of materials. And I'm here in particular because this was an interesting project to me. I've been on your website. I've looked at some of your how we argue materials. I've had my 13-year-old, 14-year, 15-year-old, oh my goodness, I will check. But one of my kids kind of do your little game where you drag around the levels. Anyway, I admired your work. I am always interested in interactive and engaging ways to work with students that get them to think on different levels and to be more active and involved in learning principles. And so I felt that coming to see you guys present your work would be cool.
Awesome. Really glad you're here. And yeah, that's great. We'll be happy to talk to your 15-year-old as well if they have questions for us. Fun. And Gorman, did you want to say anything else by way of introduction?
Yeah, sure. So I'm K-12 Director of Social Studies for Braintree Public Schools. Co-chair of the NERCVirtual conference. I'm here to facilitate, but also I'm always looking to find strategies, approaches for my staff and myself in terms of getting students to become more active contributors, participants in the learning process rather than teachers just delivering content. I think this is a great way for students to kind of also find some voice and being able to, contribute their insights and perspectives on various issues. And I think this is a great strategy and approach, resource for them to incorporate that into their classes.
Awesome. We're really glad you guys are all here, and we'll see if anybody else trickles in here. But yeah, I thought sort of brief agenda for today. We'll show you how to use an argument mapping software tool called MindMap. We'll kind of have a little bit of a live interactive discussion about whether the US should implement mail-in voting, which obviously is a topic that's pretty salient right now. And then we'll also introduce you briefly to our puzzle game that Allison already alluded to. And then we can maybe do some practice exercises on intellectual charity in our online course, which I'll show you guys as well. And charity is a sort of habit or disposition that we teach students using the practice exercises that I'll show you. And it sort of works hand in hand with the practical argument analysis and evaluation skills to hopefully cultivate students that are capable and excited of having rigorous discussions about topics that can be controversial. And then with any time remaining, Aiden can also show you some practice exercises that we developed specifically for evidence and reasoning. So Sean, earlier you referred to wanting students to support their claims with evidence, but not just have evidence, but be able to explain how that evidence helps to support their claims. And that's exactly what we can do with some argument mapping practice exercises that Aiden will show you. So hopefully that all sounds more or less like what you're in for here, what you signed up for. So this is a software tool called MindMap, and it's free. It integrates with Google Drive. And so what I've done here is I've created a fresh argument map canvas. And what I'm going to illustrate for you now is just how we can use this tool to have a live discussion by adding premises and evidence for a main claim that we can all see in a kind of visual way. And Allison, I'll be really curious if you think this might be useful for learners who might have more trouble accessing things, especially if it's just like large blocks of text. So this is a very visual method, as you'll see. And we'll go from there. So we've posed a question: should the US implement universal mail-in voting? There's a little bit of background text here, which is basically just saying that people want to expand mail-in voting for many reasons, but not least of which is that, COVID is making it potentially hazardous to stand in line for a long time at a polling place. So I'm hoping you guys have thought about this topic a little bit. If you haven't, it's all good. But you could still conjecture some reasons, either for or against why the U.S. should implement universal mail-in voting. So anybody want to venture a claim and a reason?
I guess we could say that they should implement it. And I guess a reason would be that it would allow more people the ability to vote and participate in our democracy.
Okay, the US should implement mail-in voting. So thank you, Sean. So that's the main claim here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Hopefully you guys can see this. So right here, I've got this main claim: the US should implement mail-in voting. And sorry, Sean, your premise was that it will allow more people to participate in democracy?
Yep.
Mail-in voting, allow more people to participate. Now that's, could you explain more about what you're thinking there in terms of how or why will mail-in voting allow more people to participate?
Well, for instance, like just say that there's a lot of people who have issues, say, with jobs, so they don't have the time to get to the polls, or they don't have the resources necessarily to get to the polls, like a ride or something like that. So mail-in voting will not only allow for more time, but it'll also allow for people, it'll take away barriers from people who are trying to actually participate.
Great. So what I heard you say was that a reason to believe that mail-in voting will allow more people to participate in our democracy is just that voting at the polls can be difficult for many people. Is that right? And it sounded like you were saying that mail-in voting is removes these obstacles.
Yeah.
Great. So what I want you guys to see that I just did there is I just used a couple of co-premises, which are two statements that work together to give one single reason to believe the claim above them. So the claim that voting can be difficult at the polls and that mail-in voting removes these obstacles, these two things are working together or holding hands. That's why they're grouped together under one single bracket here as a reason to believe the claim that mail-in voting will allow more people to participate. And then Sean, I believe you actually offered some examples of how voting at the polls can be difficult. It sounded like you said that people who are working may not have time to go to the polls. Is that right?
Yep, that was one.
And then did you also say that people may not be able to get to the polls in terms of having a ride?
Yep.
Great. So what you can see that I'm doing here is I'm just sort of trying to organize Sean's argument in a manner that makes it clearer what the logical supports are. So this is a reason to believe that this is true, and these two things work together to give a reason to believe that this is true. And these are called sub-premises, which just means it's a premise that goes underneath another premise. So a premise is just anything that gives a reason to believe the main claim. In an argument map, the main claim always goes at the top. Cool. Sean, did I sort of capture what you were saying there?
Yeah.
Great. Any other reasons?
Oh, never mind.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask the spelling of the software.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's called MindMup, MINDMUP. Yeah, and actually we have a little tutorial document that will allow you to, it'll show you how to integrate it with your Google Drive. It's actually very simple. And then how to go ahead and like start creating maps in the manner that I'm doing. Actually, Aiden, if you don't mind, if you're able to drop the tutorial doc in there.
It's already heading there.
Oh,
sounds
amazing.
Good. Yep, just take me a second to load it and I'll get the shareable link.
No problem. And so you can use MindMup for a variety of things. You can use it to help students plan out their own essay or their own piece of writing, or just kind of formulate their thoughts or brainstorm, or you can use it more in the manner that I'm doing now to facilitate a discussion between students. And conveniently, this works, if everyone's sitting in a classroom and you can project this on the board, or you can do it on Zoom in the manner that I'm now doing. So we find it very useful. Go ahead.
Oh, anyway, I was preparing to think about a counterclaim for the sake.
Great.
Mail-in voting is subject to delay and confusion.
Great. So thank you, first of all, for articulating a counterclaim. One thing that we can do with an argument map is I can ask you, Allison, which, if any, of Sean's premises do you disagree with, or do you just grant that these premises are true, but you disagree with the main claim directly? Do you see what I'm asking? Like,
yes.
Could you point at somewhere in this map?
And I would say, first of all, that I guess I believe my claim is true, which I never would have imagined except in the current context. But in fact, I disagree with none of the premises or the supporting arguments for the US should implement mail-in voting. I actually agree with the claim, if I'm going to be factual, but I agree with this claim, and I believe that mail-in vote, the new premise I asserted, which is that mail-in voting has what did I say? I said it the first time, but
well, you said that it will lead to delays. Is that right?
delay and confusion.
Great. Awesome. So thank you for, first of all, playing devil's advocate. This is good critical thinking. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to map your objection as directly against the main claim. So you're not like let's say you were disagreeing with this premise here, then you could put the objection there. But it sounds like you're disagreeing directly with the main claim, and you're saying that mail-in voting will lead to delays and confusion. Great. Now, would you be willing to like spell that out any further in terms of what you mean by confusion?
Sure.
Or
mailing ballots to many more voters puts burdens on the mailing system and poll processing staff. It increases the burden of counting and observation. It introduces the risk of distrust in the accuracy and completeness of the counting.
yeah. So what I'm doing here is I'm just adding these as sort of separate. Thank you for kind of fleshing that out a little bit. I'm just adding these as sort of separate premises here. Increases distrust in the accuracy and completeness of the counting. Great. So what you can see here that I did is I mapped an objection in red, and I can do that with my nice little thumbs down button up here. And that's kind of convenient because now visually you can see that this argument is going against the main claim. And then these are green independent premises. These are sort of separate supports for why one might believe that mail-in voting will lead to delays and confusion. Now, Allison, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to sort of evaluate your own argument that you just gave. Like, do you find it, which, if any of these premises, do you find the most persuasive or least persuasive?
I believe, well, persuasive towards the main claim.
Well, towards your objection.
Mail-in voting, or persuasive as in supporting the assertion that it leads to delay and confusion?
Yeah, well, it sounded like you wanted to object to it. So yeah, in supporting your objection here that mail-in voting will lead to delays and confusion.
I believe that there is increased burden on mailing system and poll processing staff is a truthful statement, and it requires a different set of resources. So I think that's a strong objection. If there is, and this is, I don't know how you deal with contingencies, but if there isn't adequate staffing, funding, practice, that it is, you know, I believe it could be made resilient. I believe that it, in fact, is quite resilient. But I think that's a real thing to be dealt with by anyone on any position in the spectrum, to make sure that that objection is addressed.
Totally. Yeah, I know that's
I'm not sure. I mean, currently the distrust in the accuracy and completeness of the counting, I don't believe that is actually due to mail-in voting, except in part. It adds an intermediate step, and so I guess one can, but I would counter this argument by saying the distrust isn't necessarily, you could have trust in a mail-in system. I don't think it's intrinsic to a mail-in system to have it breed distrust.
Good. Thank you so much. Really helpful. So what I did is, you'll notice that first of all, I sort of fleshed out what you were saying here. And I noticed you gave a sub premise here, which is that the reason to believe that it puts a burden is it requires a different set of resources. So you said that you think this premise is true. And what I can do if I want to evaluate whether a premise is true or false is just change the color. So we, by convention at Thinker Analytics, we turn them blue if we think they're true, and we turn them orange if we think they're false. But you could use whatever colors seem the most intuitive to you. And then you also can change the strength of the inference connections. So if you find this particularly persuasive, that it will lead to delays and confusion, then you could mark this as stronger or weaker if you found it particularly unpersuasive. And then you can also label it to indicate why you evaluated it that way. So maybe you think that, like being understaffed will slow things down, right? Something like that. So you can label inferences and indicate how strong or weak you think those inferences are. And that's kind of a convenient next step if you want to not only make an argument, but evaluate how good is the argument. And then what I did over here is you sort of offered a counter to your own premise, which is really helpful because you can see we can kind of map this dialectic back and forth. Because certainly in a classroom, right, that's the kind of thing a student would want to do. Someone else is going to jump in and object to what you're saying. So I added an objection here, which is that the distrust isn't necessarily due to mail-in voting, because that's, did I capture that accurately? Is that what you were kind of getting at?
Yes.
Awesome. And then I labeled this as like with a however, but you could label it however you wanted.
How much do you think that it is a skill you learn to do this in real time as you're responding to a discussion in a class?
Yeah, it's definitely like, I'm pretty practiced at it at this point. So it was fairly effortless for me to kind of map it as you guys were talking. I mean, there's a little bit of a learning curve on just using the software itself, right? So I'm comfortable with like the keyboard shortcuts and things like that. It's not super tricky to learn the basic moves that you need in order to facilitate a discussion, because really what you're going to do is ask for a reason to believe something. So what I'm always going to do as a teacher is just point at a box and say, can you give me a reason to believe this? And that whatever, the reason to believe is that a student is offering will always go underneath that box. That's just how an argument map works. And then the other basic moves are moves that, you can always point at a box and ask, is it true? So we looked at 3.3 and you told me that you thought it was true. But I could ask Sean right now whether he thinks 3.4 is true, or whatever the case may be. So the basic moves are moves that anyone can pick up relatively quickly if they just want to practice it. Again, point at a box, ask, is it true? Point at an inference, ask, is it strong or weak? Then you can always ask students to give reasons to believe anything in the map. And then you can always kind of put it back on a student, right? So when you offered that objection, you said, wait a minute, what about delays and confusion? Then I just sort of put it back on you and said, okay, can you point to where you disagree in this map? And you said, okay, well, I disagree with the main claim and not necessarily with any of this argument. So there's a few sort of moves that you would do as a facilitator, but none of them are very, sophisticated. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And then ideally what you can do is also have students, you could have a student kind of leading the discussion in this manner, teach them to do it, or have them work on creating maps together, perhaps in small groups or as a class. Another thing I just want to show you guys real quick that we can do with MindMap is you can add source links. So earlier we mentioned evidence, right? Now this claim that mailing ballots to voters puts burdens on the mailing system, and because it requires a different set of resources, this sort of is the kind of thing that you could certainly ask a student to give a source for it. And if I had a link to a URL for the source, I can just paste the link. I'm just going to paste like source.com. And that will automatically create a hyperlink to whatever the URL is. So either students maybe have done their research in advance of class time, or even during a discussion, if they want to go look something up, you can just paste the link directly into the box there, and it will just create a hyperlink. So that's kind of a nifty feature of MindMap as well.
So if it were not a link, let's imagine I have used this argument for whether an amendment to the Constitution and does this or that, or
Mhm.
or what people intended. And I've given people a primary source set where they have several documents, maybe a period cartoon. If I wanted to have people connect their arguments to things that aren't web link evidence, is there a way to built into this right now? I mean, I could easily do it as a teacher in a classroom in ways that I can imagine, just sort of, but is there a way to, I could work around that by creating links to the documents. I could make them linked documents so that people could do that, but does it work in any way?
Sure. There's a few things you could do. I imagine you were just now you were describing like a physical packet that you were giving kids in a physical classroom. Is that right?
Yeah, but I might have that as an electronic packet. For example, I can make those on the Library of Congress. There's this thing called an album. And indeed, then each item, in fact, has an address within that is a web address. So if I used an album from the Teaching with Primary Sources network, people could link that way. But if I wanted them people to cite something like page,
Sure.
this piece of that is what I really think is what supports that. It doesn't need to be in this program, but if that existed in this program, I'd be curious about it.
Sure. There's a few things you might try. One is you can attach a note to any box. So you see, I just got this little notepad icon. So if I just select a box and hit the N key, N as in note, then I can attach a note that will, so you see, I just put a note on 3.4 here, and I can hide that and then pop it open again to get a note. So that would be one place that you could store, like, I don't know, an APA citation or even just a page number or something like that.
Sure.
If you wanted to put information like that.
Or a student could type out the pertinent phrase or something into that if they were using this electronically.
That's right. And the other thing you can do is you can actually just attach files to any node. So if you had, like, say, a Word doc or PDF or something that wasn't necessarily a web link, you could directly attach a file on there if you wanted to.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry to take you off the path.
Nope, that's what we're here for. So I'm happy to answer any other questions like that. Yeah.
I know Allison mentioned cartoons. It's also possible to embed images in these maps so that they actually show up, as Nate has up there. So if you have like historical images that are pertinent, or like graphs of data that are sort of show the sort of claim, sort of show the overall claim the student's trying to advocate for, that's another thing that they can put right in the map itself.
In the users of this, if you have, I saw you drag these boxes around. So if I had boxes with each of these historical documents and an image in a box, I could have people drag in a shared screen situation or a Google Doc that everyone was looking at. People could drag those around themselves. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely. So like one thing you could do is you could, I could have like doc A, doc B, I don't know, maybe you attach the documents or you attach images. And then what you could even do is there's kind of a fun exercise where you might give them like STEM starters. So let's say you had a claim like mail-in voting will lead to delays and confusion. And then you have, I don't know, like 3 or 4 different possible pieces of evidence right over here. And then the students have to decide which like documents offer evidence for claim 2.2, for example, and then they would have to drag it over to support it. That's certainly something you can do as well. So like in that case, the exercise would be like, here's a variety of plausible pieces of evidence, but it's up to you to figure out which ones are actually relevant to proving the claim. And then you just drag them over in the manner I just showed. Yeah. Does that kind of address your question?
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Mm-hmm. And if you ever use Google Classroom, like that's another, because MindMap integrates with Google Drive. Do you guys use Google Classroom?
Yep.
Awesome. So you know how on Google Classroom you can publish like a Google Doc and it will make a copy for each individual student?
Yep.
You could publish like a mind map sort of STEM starter with a couple of high level claims that need support, along with some like preloaded pieces of evidence. And then each student get their own copy, and then they would have to kind of do the exercise of dragging the evidence to support the claims and then turn that back into you. Or you could sort of do it just in one shared doc like we're doing now. Any other questions about MindMap?
One question. So this particular exercise or this particular example kind of, I guess, allows students to think in binary terms, like should or should not, but there might be certain items or questions that students have that may not necessarily support or not support that initial question, right?
Mhm.
So, you know, some students might say something like, well, I'm not really quite sure if we should or should not, but what about a consideration? Like there maybe need to be more information for them to really kind of decide whether or not we should implement mail-in voting.
Mhm.
For instance, maybe one consideration is, you know, the registration. You know, before you can vote, you need to register. So how does that play into the mail-in voting?
Mhm.
Because I guess here in Massachusetts, if you are registered, then you do receive either like on the mail, you know that you want to opt into mail-in voting, but some people may not be registered. So how do they go through the process of being, you know, doing the mail-in voting? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing
do
that you can do is use sticky notes. So a sticky note is a great place to put a question either that warrants answering as a way of giving background for the argument that we're having, or would be a prompt for further research. Or, you know, because I might, for example, here, I might put a note that says like needs evidence, right? So this would be sort of a cue that this claim may or may not be sort of substantiated by a legitimate source. And if so, we would want to know. So this would sort of, we might want to go looking for that information. But you could also put sort of more like broad discussion questions like, you know, should mail-in voting be opt-in, or should every registered voter get a ballot automatically? You know, but you might want to, I spelled ballot correctly. I feel like I didn't, but maybe I did. You could put discussion questions here. And you as a teacher can also put up some discussion questions just for students to think about to help them kind of push their thinking a little further. Yeah. Did that kind of address what you were asking, Gorman?
Yeah.
And then, you know, the student may also end up supporting a different claim, right? Like either we decide that we want to specify not just mail-in voting in general, but like opt-in mail-in voting, or, you know, maybe they support like, you know, yeah, the US should, or maybe they end up just saying Massachusetts should implement mail-in voting, right? And in that case, you would sort of develop a separate argument for why Massachusetts in particular should implement mail-in voting. So don't feel hamstrung to a binary system of yes or no on one question. You know, you can support as many claims as you can think of that relate to the topic at hand if that's what you're interested in doing as an instructor. And you can put all of them in the same argument map canvas. So this would be, you know, premise, and you could sort of develop this argument if you thought that was more interesting than the original question. So one thing I wanted to show you guys a couple other kind of cool tools. This is a map that we've developed at Thinker Analytics, where here are some discussion questions of the sort that I was just suggesting. like this one says that both sides have major premises about whether or not mail-in voting would increase voter fraud and which side has more credible evidence. There's also a question about whether state level models scale up to the whole nation, because a lot of the case in favor of mail-in voting uses case studies like Oregon or Colorado or Massachusetts. So you could, ask whether that scales up. So these are kind of discussion questions that we've published. And you can see here, we've got a map on the yes side that the US should implement mail-in voting, and then a map on the no side that they shouldn't. And these are sort of the top arguments that we found. And then you can also see that we've got links to sources and evidence for pretty much all of the claims, especially anything that was substantially, like, I don't know, this is this is like a independent source, right, giving information. So we link all those evidence and sources here. This is like a Washington Post article, for example. So these are resources that we've published on our website to give teachers just sort of like, if you didn't want to do the exercise of having students develop their own arguments, but you could use this as the basis of a discussion. Like you could spend some time evaluating which arguments you think are stronger or weaker, that kind of thing. Just wanted you guys to be aware of those as well. And we're publishing these about every week on different topics related to current events. Something kind of fun related to that, I already mentioned this puzzle game. I think Allison mentioned it as well, but if you guys are up for toying around with it a little bit on your own, we could take a second here, and I'll drop this link in the chat for you. Go ahead and take just a minute or two and try your hand at solving this puzzle exercise. So what you'll do is just drag the claims into the map in the manner that will make the argument logical. So just remember, the reason rule is that the thing below always gives a reason to believe the thing above. So you want to start by figuring out what's the main claim that goes at the top, and then what are the supports that make the argument work logically. So any questions on that, on what I'm asking? Go ahead and just take I don't know, 90 seconds and try it out on your own. And while you do that, I'm gonna get some water because I'm totally parched. I'll be right back. How are we doing? You want another 30 seconds maybe?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I don't know if you had a chance to solve it yet, but if you didn't, it's still there on the internet, so you can solve it at some other point if you'd like. Any critical feedback on that, I guess, since I subjected you to that? Any ways that we could improve it?
I think it's really more about students kind of like mapping out that process. You know, I mean, when you take a look at the various claims or the logical arguments, students need to understand, maybe need to learn like which of these statements provides the evidence versus a statement that is kind of stating a claim, you know, so it's really like getting students to understand the difference between claim and evidence, right? How the statement sounds. And so I think this is a great way to assess students' understanding of what the difference between claim and evidence, if that makes sense.
I agree with Gorman. I think could be a really frustrating exercise to give students without doing it as a class. It might be a fun thing to do for the kid who really indicate you have a feeling they like puzzles. Maybe they finish something early and they're bored. They're waiting for someone who didn't show up in their meeting and you want to give them something. But I also think that you want to maybe go through with somebody, because part of it is puzzly, right? Part of it is it's not really about, it's not about the substance of the argument, but it's about figuring out sequentiality and match, right? You can put something at the right level and then realize you didn't put it with the type of evidence, the type of claim it's about. So I didn't see the whole map. For me, there's actually some coordination stuff in dragging. So actually there are some accessibility issues. You asked for feedback.
Yeah.
There are some accessibility issues for hand-eye coordination, for what it requires in terms of manipulating and moving your screen around. You can't see the whole screen at once while you're looking at it. You don't see all of the pieces. So you maybe put something in the Bacaz level and then you realize that there's a whole other tree branch that you didn't even see. And so I think that there are factors that you want to do to make sure this is a successful and fun and educational, teaching the right things, exercise with your students, rather than having people either do it at a completely puzzly level where they're not engaging at all with the content. That's okay, actually, for a little bit, or having it teach people that they're frustrated, forget it, and have people completely blow it off because it's hard in a way that's not central to what you're trying to teach.
Totally. Yeah, I'm really glad you said that. I mean, this one in particular is kind of large and sprawling, and just the cognitive load on even sorting through all the different claims is pretty high because it's a big map and you got all these different puzzle pieces. And you can't even necessarily see that the whole thing kind of goes off the screen. So you're right, that's totally an accessibility issue. Just so you guys know, on this site, if you just click that home button, you can start with puzzles that are much smaller. So here, these are arguments with just one claim and one premise. And students can do as many of these as they can get in a row with a little timer. So, and it will, so like here, I got this one backwards, right? But you get the idea. In this case, you can kind of have students work through those and just do these kind of single claim ones. And we've got them for like level 3 would be like slightly larger puzzles. So now there's only, 3 or 4. So that would be another place you could kind of help students get those reps for those like smaller arguments. Because you're totally right that the one I just threw at you guys is like kind of pushing you in the deep end on the cognitive load for sure. Yeah.
So I have a quick question. So you have that solve button there, right? So I foresee if I gave this to my students, they wouldn't actually do it. They just press the solve button. Is there a way around that?
Well, I mean, as far as these go, this isn't currently wired to some kind of way of you tracking students' progress or their skills. So there's no incentive per se for them to, if you were sort of going to be grading them or assessing them in some manner, then they might be motivated to, just hack at it or whatever. But if it's purely just for the fun of trying to solve it, they're only, you know, short-circuiting themselves by pressing solve. They certainly can. So that's a good point. If you wanted to really assess their skills at a deeper level, Sean, then you might be more interested in our course. So this is Aiden, if you wouldn't mind dropping the link to the course in the chat as well.
Yep, and Sean saw a little bit of this, I
Oh, great.
believe, last week as well. So if there's a little bit of repetition, Sean, I apologize because I sort of foregrounded a little bit, but I will do it. I will drop the link right now.
Great. Just for, I guess for Allison and anybody else who isn't aware, so this course is a very sort of smooth onboarding to argument mapping skills. So there's 6 whole lessons, each of which have a number of topics and practice exercises before you even get into co-premises, which is something I already showed you. So it's designed to make the introduction to the critical reasoning skills as smooth as possible, with like lots and lots of practice exercises. So here you can see that I've got some exercises about intellectual charity. Well, actually, earlier you guys were talking about evidence. So let's do a little bit of stuff about evidence. So we've got some exercises on what we call evidence target practice. So you can see here what we've got is like a little argument map that social media has a positive effect on society. And the question is, assume that all of the following statements are true. Which statement gives a reason to believe premise B? So we've got 5 different potential pieces of evidence. And the question is, which one of them gives a reason to believe that social media is good for the economy? So this is kind of in the manner that you were mentioning, Sean, which is like, how do you pick out which piece of evidence is the right one to support a claim, even if they're all true? And so this is an example of that particular skill. And everything in this course is sort of designed to target a very particular skill. So we kind of call it like a logic boot camp, because it's sort of like going to the gym and you might do just curls, right? You're really focusing on your biceps or whatever, right? So this is like those kind of like micro skills. You just drill and get lots of reps with that skill. So I think the answer to this one is something like this. So every practice exercise also has feedback in it where we explain the answer. So if you didn't get it correctly, and then students are also trying to achieve a streak in order to demonstrate mastery of that learning target. So in this one, you know, I got 1 in a row correct, but I'm trying to get 4 in a row correct on that learning target. And you'll see if I get one wrong, then it will also explain why I got it wrong here. So we've got like literally thousands of extra practice exercises for all these learning targets. And students can
shuffle them kind of in and out.
Well, they'll appear for each student will see them individually for any given learning target. Some of them are randomized, some of them aren't, depending on whether there's like a series that builds on itself with a passage. Yeah. And then they have mastery checks for each lesson. So mastery check is essentially a quiz that they need to get 90% on in order to get full credit for that lesson. And if they get less than 90%, they can just try again on another version of the mastery check until they achieve 90%. Okay. And then you as an instructor can track their progress. So here I've got like my classes, and you can see that these are like my fake students. You can see their progress at a glance on all of the learning targets. Green means they aced it in the practice exercises. Blue means they aced a mastery check. And yellow means they started it, but they didn't complete a streak yet. So the idea is that it's pretty easy for you to kind of, and then you could click on any given student and see how they did on every quiz if you wanted to. Okay. Just wanted you guys to know that that was there. So anyway, Sean, earlier you were asking about like, well, my students might just cheat on the puzzle game and click, you know, check, right? But we've tried to design our course to be pretty hard to cheat on. I mean, certainly students still can and will if they want to, but you know, they're not going to be able to just sort of pretend to have gotten the answer. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you guys want to spend any time doing practice exercises on there, or did you have any questions about the course?
So you can just basically create an account as a teacher, right? And then you can like just invite people to it? Does it kind of work like almost like a Google Classroom?
Yeah, it works exactly like Google Classroom. So what you'll see is that I've got a teacher account. So I've got this page called My Classes.
Mhm.
And then I can just add a group that could be like, maybe you have multiple sections, right? Like you have first period, third period, whatever. And then you can create a group code for each of those. You can actually type your own. So be like Nate's class 1 or whatever. And then you just send students that group code. And then they'll enter it when they register themselves, just like a Google Classroom where you send them the code for the classroom, and then they'll just get automatically added to your class that way.
Awesome.
Anyway, we built this because we wanted to make teachers' lives easier, and we realized that a lot of the stuff that we're trying to teach is hard and takes a lot of time, and we want students to be able to do the practice reps outside of class time, because we know class time is very precious for teachers to focus on content, because you guys have a lot of content that you're trying to get through as well.
Great.
Aiden or Ann, did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
Oh,
Except
sorry,
to say,
Aiden.
oh no, I was just gonna say, there's already hundreds, approaching thousands of students using it already. We're getting a lot of feedback from students and teachers daily to improve the course. But the material is quite battle tested, and it's getting even more battle tested. And I will say that the content of the practice exercises is designed to be sort of subject agnostic. It's a lot of stuff from like sort of public life and media, so that your students shouldn't have to have any particular background knowledge to start taking the course. It's really just a matter of sort of pacing it according to your sort of course needs and your schedule, but also just around whatever those individual learning targets that you want them to hit.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the course is in motion and being tested, and yeah, it looks like students and teachers really like it, which is great. And thank you so much for coming at the end of the day to this great talk.
Do you guys have any other questions about MindMap or teaching arguments or accessibility, or I don't know, mail-in voting?
I'm interested in what you're just curious as you're developing this. When did you start releasing the course, and how much has it changed? And I have to say I was distracted for a minute. I had to respond to something. Is it free for teachers?
Yeah, so we've been developing it in partnership with teachers and students, the content for 3 or 4 years. We developed our sort of like scope and sequence through a lot of just working through things, especially with a core of instructional coaches. So every summer we run an instructional coach program where we pay teachers to like take a deep dive on our material and help us develop it. And that's really how we try to make sure that it's actually useful for real teachers in the real world. Is a lot of times they help us build the content. So that's been going on for 3 or 4 years. The most recent turn is that we made it in this mastery learning style, which is to say that the students they have to sort of demonstrate proficiency on the learning targets in order to move on. The previous iteration of the course, it would just mark you whether or not you were complete. So if a student just hit B on every question, then they'd still like move through the course. Whereas this, really you have to actually learn the skills in order to proceed, which is both fantastic and frustrating to some students, as you might imagine. And then, as to your question, right now it's kind of in beta version. So schools are paying us to implement it across the school or across the department. Individual teachers don't have to pay, right now, but we're developing subscription models for schools and districts to use it, because in particular, what they're paying for is access in the chat. So we've got a little chat feature that down here where like you can see Aiden's actually available on call right now. And so students and teachers chat us for help with anything related to the course. And that's what schools are paying for. Yeah.
So it's accessible to,
like,
if you're a teacher in a system that's not signed up, you can get the basic features without the chat?
Yep, you could sign up for free and you know, just get rolling with your class. We're not gonna, like, we're a nonprofit, so we don't want to put cost as an obstacle to anybody to be able to get moving with it. But we are charging for subscriptions for across a department or across the school. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. No, just thinking about if I talk about this at a workshop, I want to be able to know whether that's something that the tools that are free versus the tools that are subscription are both valuable for people to know about, but it's important for me as a person referring them to know which is which.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And you know, we want to work things out with, like, we've got some tools that are more or less able to afford this kind of thing. So we sort of work things out with whatever's going to fit with their needs. Like I said, we don't want cost to be a reason why anybody can't take it, especially a teacher. We don't want any teachers paying out of their own pocket or anything like that.
Do you have any upcoming workshops or webinars for teachers if they're being introduced to this, they want to learn more?
We have some for schools that I don't think I don't know if we have any like public facing workshops right now on the calendar, but we certainly could put some on the calendar. Aiden or Ann, am I mistaken about that?
I don't think you're mistaken. We do a lot of workshops. So if there's interest, like putting one together quickly is not hard. You know, we're kind of here on Zoom doing this kind of thing a lot. So I think the easiest thing is just to, if folks are interested, just to email either Nate or me and we'll set something up.
Yeah, we do
sounds
PDs
right.
for departments or for a whole school all the time.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you guys.
Thank you. Put a little survey form session. Supposed to say session, but
Session is
Yes.
fast enough for a Thursday late afternoon. Yeah.
yeah, I know, right? But yeah, I mean, we have these recorded, so I'm gonna post this recording. We also did part 1 on the Mass Council's website. So even if it's just